A very good morning to all of you and welcome to the Energy in Ireland Report Launch 2024. So I'm just going to take you through a small bit of housekeeping for this morning's webinar. So the event is being recorded. Attendees are muted with their cameras off. Questions can be submitted by clicking the Q&A button, and questions will be answered at the end of the event. We are recording the event and it will be distributed afterwards, and we will be doing up a Q&A document. So you can expect to have that at the end of the event. So I'm now going to pass over to Jim Shear to welcome you to this morning's event.
Thanks very much, Anya, and welcome to all who have joined. It's great to see such a high level of interest in this release today. We're going to start today with a few high-level storylines that are emerging from this year's data. We think it's very important to acknowledge that some significant progress has been made. We're at our lowest energy-related emissions in 30 years, with reductions in 7 of the last 10 years, and our highest level of renewables yet. And the data you'll see today will illustrate what's behind these results. It's important too to acknowledge that there's some real points of momentum in the decarbonisation of our energy system, thanks to the last government in collaboration with its various partners and with movement by many in society. We have record rates of funding being provided by government to support homes and businesses in their shift away from fossil fuels. And we see rates of retrofit picking up. We have a strong pipeline for offshore wind and solar PV deployment. We have new interconnection in the pipeline, lots of grid development planned and ongoing. There are new initiatives being added to the suite of business programs. We have a heat bill in front of government that provides clear market signals and lays the foundation for district heating development in Ireland and many other areas across our energy system. However, there's also a significant cautionary tale in the data today. As messaged last year, progress does not equate to success, and we really need to double down on our shift away from fossil fuels. By our best estimates, we're not on track for energy-related sectoral emission ceilings for electricity or transport, and it'll be very tight on buildings, with warmer winters and prices perhaps helping us out there, as well as increased rates of retrofit, but it's going to be very tight. Despite record levels of renewables, we're still well below even our 2020 renewable energy target, and the vast majority of our economy and society are still based on fossil fuels. And as an upshot of being behind on those targets, we're facing significant costs for statistical transfers as well for annual emissions allowances, where we'd prefer to spend that money doing the work here in Ireland. We'll have to send that off to Europe to buy compliance if we don't really change the game on deployment of energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies and practices. Also, we have a demand problem. As you'll see later today, our modelling team anticipates we'll land well over our Energy Efficiency Directive energy cap for 2030. So at the highest level, we think we can lean strongly on this data and the trends emerging from it in calling for a twin track approach. Firstly, we need to double down on technology deployment, and that's about hitting the big 5 of decarbonising industry, cutting car dependence, deploying wind, solar and grid, retrofitting heat pumps and district heating in buildings, and electrifying transport. And second, and it's tricky, our demand problem is driven by economic activity, population growth, energy and material waste, and is potentially exacerbated by enterprise expansion, in other words, growth, especially by new large energy users, but also by any new demand we add as we grow. It's a realm of policy that we feel we must now put a lot of focus on. We simply have to come together to find ways to exist and thrive within our science-based targets at national and EU level. For many reasons, not least climate justice for current and future generations, we must hold these as our non-negotiables. And it's here where reduced waste, circular economy, slowing down, and a firm focus on carbon budgets to ensure that we don't exceed our share of planetary boundaries are become essential. So with that significant challenge framed, let's get into the data. I'm going to hand you over now to Lee Carroll, Head of Statistics at SEAI.
Thanks for that, Jim. I'm just going to wait for my slides to come up. That's great. So that's great to have that that kind of great context and perspective there. So I'm Lee Carroll. I head up the Energy Statistics team in SEAI, and I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about the definitive data that we have on 2023 before handing over to Cathal, our senior energy analyst, who will speak about the best provisional data we have on 2024. And I'll start by speaking about energy emissions. And as Jim has said, in this year's Energy in Ireland reports, we're seeing significant reductions in energy-related emissions. It's important to acknowledge that thanks to the work of Dr. Emily Byrne, SEAI has moved its energy-related emission reporting from megatons of carbon dioxide to megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And this methodology update better aligns SEAI's emissions reporting to that of the national carbon budgets and the EPA's greenhouse gas inventory, which is compiled in accordance with IPCC guidelines. So emissions quantified in units of megatons of carbon equivalent provide a fuller assessment of global warming potential because they capture the impact of methane and nitrous oxide as well as those coming from CO2. Ireland's national energy-related emissions in 2023 were the lowest on record in over 30 years. Energy-related emissions in 2023 were down 8.3% on 2022 levels, and the emission levels in 2023 were lower even than those observed in 2020 during the heights of COVID impact on the economy. But while Ireland's national energy-related emissions have fallen for 7 of the last 10 years, it is important to acknowledge that SEAI's National Energy Projections report shows that the pace of these reductions is not sufficient to deliver on Ireland's legally binding carbon budgets, even under the most optimistic scenarios being considered by SEAI's modelling. To better understand where recent reductions have been made, let's break down the total energy emissions into 3 high-level sectors. We have the transport emissions and electricity emission sectors as they are defined in the national carbon budgets, and all other remaining heat emissions. And these heat emissions are defined as the total energy-related emissions, less those from electricity and less those from transport. Transport emissions in 2023 were 0.3% higher than those in 2022, though they remained 4.3% below those observed immediately before COVID. They are higher than those in the 2011 to 2014 period, and data from the CSO shows that transport activity in Ireland is on the rise. The number of kilometres driven by private cars is up 13% in the last 10 years, and the number of ton kilometres driven by road freight is up by 38%. Electricity emissions in 2023 set a new record low. Electricity emissions were down 22% on 2022 levels. And given its importance, I'll quantify the dual drivers of that step change reduction in electricity emissions in just a moment. But first, to complete the trifecta, let's look at Ireland's heat emissions. These also set a new record low in 2023 at 12 megatons of CO2 equivalent. And 2023 was the 3rd year in a row that Ireland's heat emissions have gone down. And as Jim alluded to previously, there are likely quite a few moving parts behind that reduction: weather effects, energy prices, home energy upgrades, and return to office shifts, as well as population dynamics. So I have some dedicated slides at the end of my presentation focusing in on that interesting area. Overall, energy-related emissions were down by 2.8 megatons on the previous year. This net reduction came about from a 2.1 megaton drop in electricity emissions, a 0.7 megaton drop in heat emissions, and a 0.03 megaton increase in transport emissions. In 2023, electricity accounted for almost a quarter of energy-related emissions, while transport accounted for 37.6%. Heat emissions accounted for the remaining 38.3% of all energy-related emissions. Given its leading role in reducing energy-related emissions in 2023, let's look at what drove the changes in Ireland's electricity emissions last year. Compared to 2022, Ireland's gross electricity supply in 2023 included 3 terawatt hours more net imported electricity and 1 terawatt hour more electricity from renewables. And conversely, electricity generation from natural gas, coal, oil, and peat in Irish power plants all reduced in 2023. And it was this reduction in electricity generation from fossil fuels that led to the 2.1 megaton reduction in electricity emissions. Approximately 3/4 of that reduction can be attributed to the increased use of net imported electricity, and the remaining 1/4 is attributable to the increased use of renewable energy for generation. Switching focus now from energy-related emissions to renewable energy, we note that Ireland used 1.61 terawatt hours more renewable energy in 2023 than in 2022. There were increases in the use of biodiesel, solar PV, wind generation, hydroelectric generation, ambient heat, bioethanol, and renewable wastes. So really a broad uplift across many sub-products from the renewable products. The largest individual increase in renewable energy came from higher use of biodiesel, driven by increased biofuel blending into road diesel. And the second largest individual increase came from solar PV, driven by the connection of new utility-scale solar farms to the national grid. Ireland's primary energy supply in 2023 was the most renewable it's ever been. There was 23 terawatt hours of renewable energy in our primary energy mix, shaking out at 14.1%. But this means that 82.7% of Ireland's energy still came from fossil fuels. And by way of comparison, fossil fuels accounted for 91.4% of our energy mix in 2013 and 97.7% in 2003. So we are trending down in fossil fuel use and up in terms of renewable energy use, but that swap out is happening relatively slowly. Ireland's renewable energy share is calculated and monitored by the European Commission under different iterations of the Renewable Energy Directive. And in 2023, Ireland's overall renewable energy share result was 15.3%, up from 13.1% in 2022. That result in 2023 was the highest Ireland has achieved to date without the use of statistical transfers. However, Ireland's overall result in 2023 remains below our baseline target of 16% and below the indicative trajectory set by the milestone years of 2022, 2025 and 2027. And as per data available to the stats team on the 5th of December, Ireland had the fourth lowest renewable energy share result overall in Europe after Malta, Belgium and Luxembourg. Another relevant European directive is the EED, or Energy Efficiency Directive. Under Article 4 of the EED, the European Union has set itself a binding target of reducing total final energy consumption by 763 megatons of oil equivalent by 2030. And in February of this year, the Irish government approved Ireland's own Article 4 target and submitted it as part of Ireland's NECP to Europe. Ireland is required to make sincere cooperative efforts to limit its total final energy demand to 10.451 megatons of oil equivalent, or 121.55 terawatt hours by 2030. This 2030 target represents a 13% reduction on our current energy demand. And achieving Ireland's EED target will require reducing Ireland's energy demand to its lowest level in 25 years. However, rather than reducing energy demand in 2023, Ireland's energy demand increased by 1.11 terawatt hours, or being up by 0.8% on 2022 levels. This net increase in energy demand came about from increased demand for oil, electricity, renewables and non-renewable wastes, coupled with decreased demand for natural gas, coal, coal and peat. In terms of a sectoral breakdown, Ireland saw increased energy demand from the transport and commercial sectors, coupled with decreased demand from the residential, industry, agricultural and fisheries and public service sectors. Energy demand in transport increased by 2.61 terawatt hours, or 4.5% in 2023, and energy demand from the commercial services sectors increased by 1.07 terawatt hours, or 6.9%. In 2023, the transport sector accounted for 43.4% of all end user energy demand. And while energy consumption in the residential sector accounted for a further 21.1% of demand, combined, the transport and residential sectors account for almost 2/3 of all energy demand in Ireland, highlighting that these are key focus areas for demand reduction and decarbonisation going forward. Zooming in for a moment on the transport sector, we see that the increase of 2.6 terawatt hours in 2023 was a 4.5% increase on 2022 levels, and that this increase was mainly led by increases in fuel use for the international aviation and private car subsectors. Fuel demand for international aviation increased by 1.52 terawatt hours, or up by 12.9% on the previous year, and energy demand for private cars increased by 1.16 terawatt hours, or up by 5%, neither of which are aligned to the demand reduction trend required under the Energy Efficiency Directive. In total, 94% of Ireland's transport energy came from fossil fuels in 2023. The liquid biofuels blended into our road diesel and road petrol accounted for 5.7% of transport demand, and electricity accounted for just 0.5% of transport demand. In 2023, biofuel accounted for 8.5% of road diesel's energy content, and that's up from 6.5% in 2022. Biofuel blending of sustainable compounds like FAME and HVO into road diesel helps reduce transport emissions by substituting out some fraction of the fossil-based diesel. And based on monthly survey returns up to September 2024, SEAI can make a provisional extrapolation of biofuel blending in road diesel to the end of 2024. And by that estimate, biofuel will account for 9.3% of road diesel's energy content in 2024, setting a new record. And biofuel blending into road petrol is also trending to a new high in 2024. Looking now at electricity demand, we see an increase of 1.24 terawatts in 2023. This net increase was strongly led by a 1.15 terawatt hour increase in demand from the commercial services sector, which includes data centers. So while total electricity demand increased by 4.1% in 2023 overall for the economy, electricity demand from the commercial services sector increased by 9.7%, with smaller increases in demand also observed in transport, industry, and the public service sectors, coupled with decreases in residential and agriculture and fishery sectors. The commercial services sector accounted for over 40% of electricity demand in 2023, while the residential sector accounted for just over one quarter. 1.2% of Ireland's electricity demand came from the transport sector, essentially from electric vehicles and the Lewis and Dart commuter services in Dublin. Ireland's demand for electricity has grown every year for the last 10 years. The dominant driver of this medium-term increase has been coming from the commercial services sector. Since 2013, electricity demand from the commercial services sector has increased by 79.1%. By way of comparison, across the same year period, residential energy demand for electricity increased by just 1.7% and industry demand by 6.7%. So the demand increase from the commercial services sector is one order of magnitude greater than in other sectors. The key driver of increased electricity demand in the commercial services sector has been Ireland's data centres. Data centres accounted for just under half of all electricity demand in the commercial services sector. Data centres accounted for just over 1/5, 20.1% of all electricity demand in Ireland in 2023. Data published by the CSO shows that electricity demand from data centres has increased by 412% since 2015. And it's important to note that outside of data centres, the net demand for electricity from all other combined sectors of the Irish economy has been relatively constant. Outside of data centres, Ireland's demand for electricity has only grown by 2.8% since 2015. Data centres are responsible for almost 90% of all increased electricity demand observed in the Irish economy since 2015. Looking now at where our electricity comes from, in 2023, 44.3% of our gross electricity supply came from natural gas, followed by 33.7% from wind generation and 9.5% from the net import of electricity from Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Combined, these three leading sources accounted for almost 90% of Ireland's electricity supply last year. In total, fossil fuel generation accounted for 48.9% of electricity supply in 2023, renewables for 40.7%, and other sources consisting of net imports, but also the generation of electricity from non-renewable wastes, accounted for the remaining 10.4%. On a percentage basis, Ireland's electricity supply has never had less fossil fuel generation or used more net imported electricity. And 2023 was the first year in which fossil generation accounted for less than half of Ireland's gross electricity supply. Looking briefly at renewable generation in electricity, in 2023, Ireland generated 11.7 terawatts of renewable energy from wind, just exceeding the previous record in 2020 of 11.6 terawatts. And in 2023, Ireland had 4.74 gigawatts of installed wind capacity, and that's up 4.5% on the previous year. Ireland has a cap target for 2025 of 6 gigawatts of installed capacity and 2030 cap targets of 9 gigawatts and 5 gigawatts for onshore and offshore wind capacity, respectively. SEAI's projections under the with additional measures scenario point to a total installed capacity of 11.2 gigawatts by the end of 2030. This WHAM scenario includes the levels of variable renewable capacity required to achieve Ireland's renewable energy share target of 80% for 2030, and also accounts for the anticipated future growth in electricity demand and other variables that affect the RES results. To align to the pace of the WHAM projections that are needed to deliver on that 80% RES-E target, the rollout of onshore wind capacity needs to return to the rate previously achieved between 2016 and 2019. And additionally, offshore wind projects delivering annual increases in installed capacity of between 0.8 and 1.4 gigawatts annually need to be in place before the end of 2030. Heat demand is defined as the total energy demand, less electricity demand and less transport demand. And by that definition, heat demand in Ireland fell by 2.64 terawatts in 2023. Heat demand reduced across all sectors of the Irish economy: residential, industry, agriculture, fisheries, public services and commercial services. Currently, the residential sector accounts for 44.6% of that heat demand, followed by the industry sector, which accounts for 35.8%. Zooming in now on the residential sector and looking at its combined heat and electricity demand, we see that 2023 was the third year in a row in which residential energy demand has fallen, reducing its level to figures last seen in 1998. Residential demand for the three key energy products of oil, electricity and natural gas were all down in 2023 compared to 2020 levels. Oil demand was down 25.1%, electricity demand was down by 7%, and gas demand was down by 21.2%. And it is useful to recall that residential energy demand in 2020 was particularly high due to COVID-related work and school from home mandates. The observed reduction in residential energy demand in the last few years has likely been driven by multiple competing factors: high energy prices, weather effects, behavioral effects such as post-COVID return to office after extended work from home periods, the impact of new builds and home energy upgrades on heating efficiency, and increases in Ireland's population. Decoupling the weighted effect of these multiple drivers on residential heat and energy demand is extremely challenging. However, in terms of a high-level qualitative explanation, two factors are likely to have played a key role in the observed reduction in residential energy demand in the last 2 years. Those are the reduced need for home heating due to higher than average external ambient temperatures, and the affordability of home heating due to periods of relatively high energy prices. Met Éireann publishes daily weather and temperature data from multiple weather stations around Ireland, and this data includes the number of heating degree days per month. And the number of heating degree days that fall into a given calendar year provide a simple, high-level metric that quantifies how often and how intensely Irish homes needed to be heated that year. So while 2019, 2020 and 2021 all had close to the long-term average number of heating degree days, 2022 had 6.9% less than average, and 2023 had 12.6% less than average. And this means that 2023 and 2022 were both warmer than average, and so homes were likely to have required less heating, driving down their energy and heating demands, and also their energy and heating emissions. Additionally, the unit prices of all three major energy products used in the residential sector, oil, electricity and natural gas, were higher in 2020 and 2023 than in 2020. The unit price of kerosene in 2023 was 82.9% higher than in 2020. The effective unit price of household electricity was up by 35%, and the effective unit price of household gas was up by over 125%. And through price elasticity effects, these substantial increases in residential energy costs are likely to have acted to reduce residential energy demand in 2023 and 2022 compared to 2020. So the drivers of our weather and our wallets have likely acted to reduce residential energy demand. My colleague Mary Holland will speak more to energy prices in a later presentation. But with that, I'm going to hand over to Cathal, who will give us some insights on demand and energy supply and emissions from electricity, transport and heat in 2024. Over to you, Cathal.
Thank you very much, Lee. Just pull this open. And just let me start by saying, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat, and we'll try and answer them. Either we'll either provide a reply in the chat, or we'll discuss them at the end. But if you want to add the questions in there as we go along, it's probably best. So as Lee has brought us up to the date for with the annual definitive data to the end of 2023, I'll look at the monthly data that we have for 2024 in particular, and see what it can tell us. My name is Cathal O'Cleric. I'm the Senior Energy Analyst on the Energy Statistics team. And I'll introduce the monthly energy data that we have. We collect three data sets, collect and report three data sets. That's electricity, gas, and oil. So these monthly electricity, gas, and oil data sets, Ireland is required to report them under the Energy Statistics Regulation. SEAI fulfilled that obligation. These data sets provide visibility on around 92% of Ireland's final energy consumption. They provide quantities and type of energy consumed, but provide limited visibility on where in the economy that consumption took place. They also, in particular, don't cover solid fuels, which are important when it comes to assessing emissions in heat. So solid fuels are captured via our own surveys, but the coverage is not as good as that provided by these three data sets here. So the data sets on the electricity data, it provides generated quantities by generator type, and it is sourced from EirGrid. For the gas data, we get volumes of gas from production, from imports, and carrying on to consumption, and that comes from Gas Networks Ireland. And on the oil data, we get the movements of oil products and biofuels and bioliquids into Ireland and for sale. And broadly speaking, they are split out by transport and non-transport uses. And that is provided by the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications via the Oil Levy Assessment database. So we can analyze each of these three data sets, and they can help us inform or provide indicators of Ireland's trends under the three main categories that Lee alluded to earlier. That's electricity, heat, and transport. With starting off on the electricity, first look at some of the detail on the electricity side and what's available in the monthly data and what it tells us for 2024. So the chart at the bottom shows the monthly annual output from grid-connected wind farms. You can see that wind generation obviously exhibits a strong seasonal variation. So the blue bars represent the energy exported to the grid that month, and the red line shows the 12-month annual average. And we could see that approximately 2/3 more wind is generated in the 6-month period between October and March each year than in the other half a year. Ireland's best wind month on record was December 2023, when it produced 1.5 terawatt hours of electricity. And in the first 9 months of 2024, Ireland has produced 8.1 terawatt hours of electricity, and this is almost identical to the amount generated in the same period in 2023. I'll now briefly look at solar PV. So the chart at the bottom shows the output from grid-connected solar farms each month. And again, the solar PV exhibits strong seasonal variation, peaking in June or July. And the seasonal profile of the PV is complementary to that of solar. Solar is highest during the it's complementary to that of wind, with solar PV being highest during the summer when wind is at its lowest. So, and using this seasonal profile from January to September, we estimate solar PV generation from solar farms in Ireland will be at around 0.73 terawatt hours in 2024. This means that total solar PV, so that's solar farms and rooftop solar, could reach 1 terawatt hour for 2024, with approximately 3/4 of that coming from the solar farms. So the next piece is to look at the grid, total grid supply of electricity on a monthly basis, and also the indigenous generation, or the generation of electricity in Ireland. The chart on the left shows the gross electricity supplied through the grid, and despite the strong seasonality of electricity demand in the monthly data, the 12-month average of electricity being supplied to the market shows a continuous increase since 2015 and continuing into Q3 of 2024. In contrast, the 12-month average of electricity being generated in Ireland on the right-hand side has been falling since approximately January 2023. And the primary reason for this is the increased use of net imports of electricity. This chart shows the monthly net imports. So this is the net quantity of electricity entering Ireland from either Northern Ireland or from Great Britain. Around 10% of Ireland's gross electricity supply came from net imports in 2023, and the steady increase in the 12-month average, this is the black line you can see in this chart, steady increase can be seen from January 2023 up till present. SEAI provisionally estimates that net imported electricity will account for around 14% of Ireland's electricity supply this year. So to put that in context and to look at the relative contribution of net imported electricity to Ireland's electricity supply, we can look at this chart here, which shows indigenous supply in green and net imports in purple. 100% is the total amount of grid electricity supply. So the indigenous electricity supply is the primary principal source of electricity, obviously, for Ireland each month. But the data shows some extended periods, such as from May 2013 to June 2015, when net imports consistently made contributions to Ireland's electricity supply. In those periods where purple data is above the 100% line, Ireland was a net exporter of electricity, specifically to Northern Ireland. In other words, Ireland generated more than 100% of our own electricity needs and exported the remainder. The largest contribution from net imports to date occurred in June 2024, when net imports accounted for over 20% of Ireland's utility scale electricity supply. So here we have a waterfall chart that shows the changes in electricity generation from the first 9 months of 2023 to the first 9 months of 2024. And the changes this is broken out by generator type or source. And it's the easiest way to think of this is to group it into sort of 3 groups. We have net imports on the left-hand side. So we have net imports increased by 1.7 terawatt hours. Then we had an increase in renewables of about 0.39 terawatt hours. That's solar PV, wind, biomass, hydro, etc. Then we had a decrease in non-renewable generation, which is almost entirely fossil fuels with some non-renewable waste, with a large drop in natural gas generation this year. Peat has dropped again as peat. There's no longer any electricity generated from peat since the end of 2023. So we can use this monthly data and the changes that we've seen, and we can extrapolate it to estimate the quantities of electricity from each source to the end of 2024, and then we can convert that to fuel consumption and calculate emissions. A note of caution here is that doing this extrapolation is based on numerous assumptions and is subject to changes in the electricity market forces, weather, unscheduled maintenance of plants and things like that. But if we start with Ireland's official electricity emissions under the national carbon budgets, as they were determined by the EPA have reported electricity emissions of 9.9, 9.7, and 7.6 megatons of CO2 equivalent for the first 3 years of the carbon budget. Based on our extrapolation, we estimate that the electricity sector will emit approximately 6.9 megatons in 2024. This would be a reduction of about 8% on the 2023 levels. And if we follow that logic on, that would leave approximately 5.9 megatons remaining in the electricity sectoral emission ceiling under the first carbon budget period. So we could also do a similar exercise for transport. I won't go into the details now, but we can use the oil data on particularly the diesel and gasoline data that we report, and conducting the same analysis. Our extrapolation shows that the transport emissions in 2024 under the transport SEC will be approximately 11.7 megatons. This would be down just 0.6% on 2023 levels. So the key takeaway here is that transport emissions in 2022, 2023, and 2024 are essentially constant. And this is not aligned with the significant downward trajectory that is required by the sectoral emission ceiling for transport. Again, so if we follow that extrapolation, we're left with a remainder of 7.6 megatons of CO2 equivalent under the sectoral emission ceiling that can be emitted in 2025. So Ireland would need to reduce its transport emissions to that level. If we don't, then the remainder would be carried over. So achieving transport emissions of 7.6 in 2025 would require an unprecedented reduction of 35% next year. For context, transport emissions fell by 16% in 2020 due to the COVID-related restrictions. So that's just to put it into context. So final piece to this, the high-level categories, we're going to look at heat. So while we can make reasonable extrapolations of electricity and transport emissions to the end of 2024, we can't do this for heat. Essentially, there is too much uncertainty around the impact of the Q4 heating season. And we also don't have visibility on, or good visibility on, solid fuel sales until a few months after the fact. So, but what we can do is we can look at natural gas demand, we can look at kerosene demand and see what the trend is. So on the left-hand side here, we have monthly residential gas demand, and that shows about a 5.4% increase over the first 9 months of 2024. And on the heating oil, so this is kerosene, which is almost exclusively used in the residential sector, again shows a 3.6% increase across the first 9 months of 2024. As Leah alluded to earlier, one of the key drivers behind this is the weather measured in heating degree days for analysis. And so early indications from Met Éireann's heating degree days shows that 2024 is milder than the long-term average, but is colder than 2023. I'll also take this opportunity to note that while transport and electricity have well-defined sectoral emission ceilings with carbon budgets, there is no explicit target for energy-related emissions or heat emissions as we're looking at here in the carbon budgets. They're spread out across multiple sectors. But here we can look at industry and commercial natural gas demand, and again, it is trending upwards. In the first 9 months of 2024, there's been a 9.5% increase over 2023. So I'd like to finish there before passing on to Emma for the projections. Just reiterate that our data indicates that electricity emissions are trending down for 2024. Transport emissions are almost the same, and that early indications from the partial data that we have for heat show increased demand for heating oil and natural gas. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Carl. So I'm Emma Lynch from the energy modeling team here in SEAI, and I'm going to give a brief overview of some of the key insights from our 2024 national energy projections. SEAI's energy projections are modeled using the National Energy Modeling Framework, which is a model of Ireland's energy system developed and maintained by SEAI for several different analytics applications. The national energy projections in particular are produced annually and used to assess the current state of policies and measures relating to energy in Ireland and their potential to lead to the achievement of our national and EU energy and climate obligations. Our full report from the latest projections is available on our website. That'll give more detail on the assumptions that are included in the modeling and also more kind of sectoral detail, such as critical success factors by sector and risks to be aware of. Today, I'm just going to keep it high level and look at our overall projections for energy and projected progress across the 3 dimensions that have been discussed already today. So total energy consumption, renewable energy share, and energy-related emissions. So projecting into the future, we're faced with uncertainty, of course, and so we need to capture alternative scenarios or pathways for Ireland's energy future and understand the impact that policy can have on it. So we start with a baseline representation of Ireland's energy system, including potential underlying growth and demand, available technologies, decisions consumers are faced with, and price impacts, among other factors. We then need to layer on kind of different packages of measures that results in 3 categories of scenarios modeled in the national energy projections for 2024. So this is kind of our policy view. The first 2 that are listed here inform the energy component of Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions projections that are produced by the EPA. And the third is a variation that's used to assess the risk of delayed achievement. So it's a variation on the WAM scenario. So the first scenario that's listed there that we have is the with existing measures scenario, or the WEM. So the WEM scenario is a projection of future energy use based on the estimated impacts of policies and measures that are currently implemented and actions committed to by government with resources allocated currently. And so for the 2024 projections to become a part of the WEM scenario, a measure must have been in place by the end of 2022. And no new measures are assumed to be implemented afterwards. So it's also important to note that even where measures have been implemented, the targets that those measures are aiming towards are not automatically assumed to be met in this scenario. For example, supports to incentivize electric vehicles or heat pump uptake can be implemented, but they may not alone be sufficient to deliver the level and kind of pace of change that is needed to hit a target of, say, 80% electric vehicles on the road or 400,000 heat pumps in homes by 2030. The second scenario listed there is the with additional measures scenario, or WAM. And this is significantly more ambitious. It is a projection of future energy use based on the estimated impact of measures outlined in latest government plans at the time when we produced the projections. So this includes all the policies and measures that are in the WEM scenario, plus those that are included in latest government plans, even those that have not yet been fully implemented. The climate action plan would be the main source here for those government plans. And that's the source of the information on government policies and measures that are reviewed to produce the WAM scenario. In this set of projections, in nearly all cases, the scenario assumes that the CAP targets will be fully achieved through the acceleration of existing and implementation of additional measures. Though as we get closer to 2030, the feasibility of assuming target achievement by 2030 through implemented measures in that time frame needs continuous review, and the WAM can be revised accordingly each year. So for this reason, this past year, in addition to the WEM and the WAM projections, SEAI also modeled several risk scenarios, and we'll be looking at a combined risk scenario today. The risk scenarios were built to examine the potential impact of delays in achieving some of the most significant targets that were set out in the latest climate action plan at the time of the projections, which was CAP 24. And these kind of point to areas across all sectors where immediate action would be needed in order to accelerate and strengthen the existing policies to mitigate risk of falling short on 2030 targets. So the first of the three areas of the projections outputs that we're going to look at today is the final energy consumption. And we're reviewing this again as previously looked at today. We're looking at this in terms of the EU Energy Efficiency Directive. So that is the total energy consumed by end users in Ireland, including aviation and excluding ambient heat. So the first energy policy pathway that we're looking at is in green at the top, and that broadly represents the policy that's been implemented today, the WEM scenario, where that policy gets us to when we project out to 2040. So I suppose in terms of simplifying that, we're thinking about this as the current path or the do nothing further path. So you can see there's the historical dip representing mostly our drop in transport energy consumption during COVID. And you can also see the rebound in growth before policy impacts start to outpace growth, and we start to see an actual dip in total final energy consumption. And the arrows represent the kind of opposing forces along the path to Ireland's energy future here. So the gains made in energy efficiency policy through the reduction of energy use through retrofits, heat pumps, electric vehicles, shifting to public transportation, that all has to overcome new energy demand on our energy system. And the arrows are different sizes here for a reason. As we are currently out of balance, as Lee discussed earlier, the total energy consumed in Ireland increased by 1.1 terawatt hours in 2023. So that's up on the previous year. And that was driven by increased energy demand in transport and commercial services sectors. So this is currently out of balance, and so more, I suppose, additional measures would be needed in order to get us closer to the target. So looking at the alternative path, other than what's currently implemented, we can see the planned path in blue. That's the WAM scenario, the additional measures scenario. So this new path represents broadly all the energy policy that's been planned under the latest climate action plan. And the effect of that would be that the policy makes a dent in the energy consumption sooner, starting from next year, to start reducing it further and faster. So we can see in the white dashed line there, this is Ireland's obligation under the Energy Efficiency Directive, as Lee mentioned earlier. That's our commitment to lower the final energy consumption and that requires a 13% reduction on 2023 levels. So the size of the gap to the target shows us that when it comes to energy consumption, the energy efficiency measures implemented and planned to date aren't sufficient to hit this target. It would require large-scale demand reduction to bring us down to the lowest level in 25 years. This means looking at the structure of our energy demand and how it should change for a future vision of energy consumption in Ireland. So as we've seen, the gap between the WEM and the WAM sort of illustrates effectively the gap from implemented to planned. So current path versus the planned path is shown there as the difference between the WEM and the WAM scenarios. And there's a much larger gap to what is required under the EED. When we add in the third scenario, the risk scenario there, that's depicted in light blue, we can see the impact of widespread delays in the achievement of planned measures by 2030. And the key targets that we looked at in this scenario are delays in transport demand reduction, basically back to CAP 21 levels of planned reduction, higher growth in international aviation, a delay in the uptake of electric vehicles, retrofits and heat pumps, and delays in the deployment of district heating networks. The combined effect of all of these is essentially a widespread delays that increases the projected overshoot of the 2030 EED final energy consumption target to 24%, as compared to the 19% overshoot in the WAM scenario. So this would set Ireland on a trajectory that's much closer to the WEM scenario with respect to the EED progress. So there's quite a lot to do here to get to that target. So the second of the main projections outputs I'm going to talk about is renewable energy share. So again, this plot is expressed in terms of overall renewable energy share, and that's according to another EU directive that was discussed earlier, the Renewable Energy Directive. So again, this is a complex definition, but for the purposes of simplification, it's the percentage of Ireland's total energy use, which is renewable. And again, we can see two opposing forces along our renewable energy path here. So in renewable energy share, new renewable capacity like wind and solar for electricity generation, and also the use of renewable fuels in heat and transport has to overcome the new demand that makes the overall pot bigger, that they need to contribute a greater and greater share to. And the red arrow again is larger here for a reason, as Lee and Cathal mentioned. Right now, we're out of balance here as well. Energy demand is growing, as we've seen from the latest statistics, that in 2023, electricity demand grew more than renewable generation output, and the growth in consumption from services outpaced our growth in renewables. So again, the second path here in blue represents all energy policy that's been committed to under the latest climate action plan. So that's our WAM scenario. Much of this hasn't been fully implemented yet and realized, but the effect would be that our renewable share would accelerate quicker. So the dotted black line represents our binding commitment to the overall renewable energy share of 43% by 2030. The large dots there represent interim targets. So it's clear even with the planned policy pathway, with the most ambitious scenario, that we're still a significant distance off these adopted targets. There's really only that kind of just hitting it at the very end of 2030. So there's a lot of risk baked into that. Any potential delay can have an impact on whether we can reach that target or not. So we did see more renewable energy share in 2023 than in 2022 from biodiesel and solar PV. But to align with the pace of the WAM projections needed to deliver on like an 80% Res-E target, which is a big driver of this overall renewable energy share, the rollout of onshore wind capacity really needs to ramp up and return to 2016 to 2019 rates, and offshore wind projects would need to be in place before 2030 that could deliver between 0.8 and 1.4 gigawatts annually, as Lee mentioned previously. So as we saw with the overall res in the WAM scenario, that's 12% higher than the WEM by 2030. That's due mostly to the assumption of achieving the cap targets for 80% renewable energy share in electricity generation, and also 5.7 terawatt hours of biomethane by 2030. When we add in the risk scenario, again in light blue, this changes dramatically. So a delay in the deployment of offshore wind capacity is assumed here. That alone would result in a projected shortfall of 6 percentage points from the renewable energy directive target, with Ireland only reaching 37% and not passing 43% 2030 target until 2034. If we combine other risks with that offshore wind risk, so including delays in biomethane delivery and offshore wind, as I mentioned, as well as additional delays in the deployment of district heating networks, delays in transport demand reduction. The combined effect of these delays in the widespread delay scenario increases the projected shortfall of the 2030 RES target dramatically to 13 percentage points below the target. So that's more in line with the WEM in 2030 and not passing the 43% 2030 target until 2036. So once again, there's a significant risk that's baked in here and needs to, it means that there needs to be a focus and a doubling down on delivering the targets that are in 2030, as well as looking at managing that demand force as well. So finally, if we kind of put those pictures together and we look at emissions, really the timing here is everything. So this plot represents the consequences of the gaps that we've seen. So it's the accumulation of emissions over time relative to the energy industrial processes portion of our national carbon budgets. So our current path is the top curve in green, our planned path, the blue curve, and what's necessary is the red dotted line. So that's the kind of the indicative trajectory that would mean compliance with our first and second carbon budget. So we're currently on a path to exceed our emissions ceiling, and the kind of cumulative nature of the energy related emissions targets means everything that we can do now has a critical impact going forward. So now if we look at this annually, we can see in this figure that the annual emissions that are projected from energy use and industrial processes for the first two carbon budgets periods for the WEM and WAM scenarios. It illustrates the indicative annual emissions trajectory that would have been required in the red dashed line to stay within the carbon budgets. Because we were above those, above that indicative trajectory, there's a corrected trajectory. There's kind of a steeper pace of reduction that's necessary. So we can see that the dashed blue line represents the kind of catch-up trajectory, you could say, that would be needed if we followed the WEM and WAM pathways, which have kind of they don't really diverge until after 2025. But you can see if we follow those pathways through the end of the first carbon budget period, in order to correct for that, because of the cumulative nature of the emissions targets, that we would need to really steeply reduce our annual emissions. And so the more like the increasingly difficult carbon budget 2, plus the carryover of any potential overshoot means that that line gets a lot steeper, that catch-up trajectory that compounds as we go forward and into the next two carbon budgets. So this really kind of brings that picture together as far as the additional work that's needed to mitigate any risk in the planned policies that we have at the moment, plus going kind of further above that, and again, kind of managing that demand aspect, which we've talked about, to make sure that there's that's we're not making it more difficult by increasing demand. So I'll stop there. That's the picture of the projections, and I'll hand over to Mary Holland to discuss prices.
That's great. Thank you very much, Emma. I just take control of the Slides, great. So hello to everyone today. Good afternoon. It's great to see so many of you here today at our Energy in Ireland launch for this year. So today I'm Mary Holland, and I'm going to present on our energy prices that we collect in the energy statistics team. So in the energy statistics team, we are empowered by international reporting requirements to collect certain energy price data. We must report these prices to Eurostat and the IEA, and this allows us to have multiple energy price outputs. We also produce reports on these prices, and you can find them on our website. Outside of these reporting requirements, we also publish a quarterly fuel cost comparison, which goes back to the 1980s and compares energy costs for space heating for homes and businesses. And with these price collections, when we notice something noteworthy, we produce blogs, which are then published on the SEAI website. So today, I'm going to focus first on electricity and gas prices as they impact a lot of homes and businesses. So we collect electricity and gas prices twice a year under an EU regulation, and it is required international best practice to report the effective unit price of energy. Now, most of us are familiar with the unit price of electricity and gas on our bills. However, it is not an ideal measure of the true cost of energy. So the true cost includes the unit price, but also standing charges, taxes and levies, and any price supports in our bills. And this is the effective unit price, and this is the truest measure of energy costs. Now, we all know that we've experienced higher energy prices in the last few years, but it's also important to recognise a suite of supports from government to help manage those higher prices. There have been supports for households, for example, the VAT reduction on residential gas and electricity bills that began in 2022 and will run until next April. Domestic electricity customers have now received 8 credits on their bills from April 2022 to the most recent in November 2024. We have one more due in January, which will bring it up to a total credit on our bills of €1,500. Now, these credits are applied to electricity bills as the easiest way to apply to everyone, as almost everyone uses electricity, but not everyone uses gas and oil. Now, these credits are applied directly at supplier level on our electricity bills, and so they are caught by the effective unit price. There were also a number of business supports over the last few years, with different supports depending on the scale and type of business impacted. Now, these supports are not applied directly on the bill, but are applied later on by revenue and not captured by suppliers, so they are not part of the effective unit price that I will present on today. So as I mentioned, under the EU regulation on electricity and gas prices, we collect prices twice a year for households and businesses. That's for the period January to June, first semester, and July to December, the second semester. And these prices are collected across a number of consumption bands defined in the regulation. And this data collection began in 2007, and the graph here looks at the average prices for household electricity since then, with the blue bars showing the price per semester and the yellow line smoothing out systematic seasonal effects to present the 12-month average. And we can see here in the graph that household electricity prices increased by 55% over the 2-year period from the first half of 2022 up to the first half of 2024, which is the latest time we have price data for. And of course, we must remember that the government credits are accounted for in these prices, as this is the true cost of household electricity. And with the price collection, we can delve a little deeper into the prices, as we have the breakdown for the base price, non-recoverable taxes and levies, and VAT. And this graph here, it just shows the impact of the account credits, which act as a negative price component and reduce the effective unit price. So for example, you can see that in the first half of 2023, on our electricity bills, that the credits were worth about 18 cents per kilowatt hour. So here we have a similar graph for household gas prices, and you can really see the seasonal zigzag effect there on the bars, which with the smoothing out with the yellow line. And we can see that the prices really started to increase in the second half of 2022. And between the 2-year period, between the first half of 2022 and the first half of 2024, they've doubled. However, if you compare to the first half of 2023, they've actually fallen by 13%. Now, when we compare energy prices across countries, it is international best practice to use purchasing power parities. So we all know from our holidays that the same euro coin spends differently in Ireland than in Luxembourg and than Portugal, for example. And to compare energy prices in straight euros can be misleading. So it is important to account for the ability to pay when comparing prices. So Eurostat use purchasing power parity to facilitate meaningful comparisons. Now, it's not just a GDP correction, it uses a very robust methodology based on the cost of a basket of goods with various levels of normalization. And these are used to calculate an artificial currency unit, the purchasing power standard. So theoretically, one purchasing power standard can buy the same amount of goods and services in each country. So here we have a map of household electricity prices across EU countries. And now a map like this is useful when comparing the cost of electricity experienced by household. And on the left-hand side of the graph here, we have the ranking of Irish prices. And by this measure, Ireland's residential electricity cost is in the upper quartile range. But if we switch our metric, our lens to purchasing power standard, we start to compare the affordability of that electricity to Irish homes. And by that measure, Ireland's electricity prices are more mid-table. Both metrics are correct and provide valuable insights, but it is important not to confuse the two. And similar graphs for residential gas prices. In terms of cost, Ireland is in the upper quartile range, but in terms of PPS affordability, we are interquartile mid-table. So far we've been looking at electricity or at residential prices, but business prices are important too. And a key difference is that residential prices come with hedging. Business, in particularly big business, are closer to wholesale prices and more exposed to price shocks. So they go up fast and they go down fast. And you can see here again in our graph that electricity business prices started to come down in early 2023. And although they are 3% higher over the 24-month period, they actually dropped by 16% over the 12 months from the first half of 2023 to the first half of 2024. Similarly with gas prices to business, again, although there was a 1% increase over a 24-month period, they have fallen by 18% over the last 12 months. And we expect to see these drops in business prices mirrored in residential prices with a bit of a delay to allow for the hedging effect. Now, these are positive signs, but prices are still substantially higher than they were in the past. Now, although we have a strong focus on electricity and gas prices because they are required under EU regulations, we also have prices on a number of other energy products. Just before I finish up, I'll present on some other price data that we have. So we have some road transport fuel prices for road diesel and petrol. And this is the price at the pumps, and it's dominated by the underlying crude oil price. And there are strong features common to both. To the drop in COVID and the peak in the first quarter of 2022, which coincided with the invasion of the Ukraine. And prices have come down somewhat since then. And there are a lot of moving parts making up this price, including the cost of crude oil, VAT, excise, and carbon taxes. So this is my last slide for today, and it's a graph for domestic heating oil for kerosene. And this is the spot price at the start of each quarter that we find in a fuel cost comparison. And the trend is similar to the road transport fuels with the added effect of the weather. So just to summarise, what we have seen are significant price increases for electricity, gas and oil over the last few years. And while we are seeing strong signs of recovery, they are essentially higher across the board than pre-COVID. And I'm afraid that today I don't have time to talk about our other prices, but we encourage you to go to our website and to look at all the energy prices that we have published there. And it also goes into more detail on some of the prices that I have presented on today. So that's it for me. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to hand over back to Lee now, who is taking over as Niall is unavailable today. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so like a bad penny, I keep popping up. We don't have today our senior GIS expert, Niall Delaney, but I'm going to do my level best to talk us through data localization and GIS mapping work that's ongoing at SEAI and how that's helping inform a just transition to a sustainable future. So GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, allows SEAI to go beyond viewing Ireland as a single national monolith. GIS lets us bring more nuance to our data and our insights by going beyond national totals and averages. We can use GIS to change the zoom settings on the statistics we generate. For example, we can use GIS to look at the energy data of the 13 local authorities that make up the country. Or we can zoom in even further to the 19,000 small area divisions that are defined and used by the CSO to publish its census data. And these CSO small areas are really at the sweet spot between providing highly granular and spatially disaggregated information while preserving the confidentiality and anonymity of the people living within those small areas. So really the CSOs, you can kind of think of them as the cellular structure of Ireland's data. They're the smallest unit that we can work with and publicly discuss. And internally at SEAI, we're also looking to see if the cluster, looking at even finer granularity, looking to see if the clustering of home energy upgrade works might offer operational efficiencies, further helping Ireland hit its B2 targets out to 2030. Essentially, the GIS work we're doing aims to provide a continuity and cohesiveness in energy data across all levels, all 4 levels of granularity. We want to be able to inform discussions and debate on policy, planning, local action, and family decisions. And we want to ensure that those conversations that are happening at every level speak to and with coherent and joined up data, rather than siloed data sets that are only relevant in a narrow context. SEAI already has a broad portfolio of spatial data available on its website. At the national level, there's the SEAI Wind Atlas, the Solar Atlas, our bioenergy map, the geothermal potential map based on GSI data, SEAI's heat demand map, and also Ireland's hydroelectric capacity, as well as SEAI's BER map, which provides BER breakdown and mapping of homes on the BER database across Ireland at that small area level from the CSO. And in terms of regional energy mapping and support, we've developed the local area climate action plan dashboards. And these are there to support LAs or local authorities in building up their individual climate action plans as required under national legislation, and to monitor progress against those plans. So the dashboard would allow energy and energy grant information to be made more easily available to the local authority. So if a local authority planner chooses the home energy upgrades layer on the dashboard, then they can see how much of SEI investment has gone directly into that local authority and what types of SEI grants are most popular in that local authority and neighbouring local authorities as well. And this might show a local authority planner where they're missing a trick. For example, they might see that other neighbouring local authorities are bringing in a lot of funding through community grants, and they might be motivated to pursue that avenue themselves. And similarly, if this hypothetical planner was to click on the domestic BER layer of the dashboard, then they can kind of build out an understanding of the distribution and count of their housing stock as it appears in SEAI's database. And this can provide insights on how many houses are near or far from achieving a B2 rating and help inform the strategies that they're going to roll out to promote and drive these upgrades. The individual local authority climate action plans also call for the establishment of decarbonised zones, and many local authorities, in this example I've chosen Waterford, they're considering district heating as an option. GIS analysis can provide data on heat demand, so to help local authority planners visualize what areas in their authority in their space might be suitable for district heating. Higher heat density, so the yellow spots in this plot, correspond to greater potential because more heat could be delivered with less piping. And hospitals and universities are ideal anchor loads for district heating networks. They have reliable and continuously high demand for heat and are generally the first buildings that are connected to the network. Here are two proposals for district heating in Waterford City based on a knowledge of heat demand and desktop GIS analysis. And this SEAI data is assisting with the similar planning around all around the country. It's a precursor to more, let's say, boots on the ground engineering assessments, but it tells local authorities where they might want to start looking for those district heating opportunities. At the community level, we've just built and are now launching another dashboard to support SEAI's Sustainable Energy Communities, or SECs. This dashboard pulls and summarizes BER data on a community by community basis. In this example, I've chosen the SEC in Balbriggan. And here, the map on the left shows the most common BER ratings in that Balbriggan sustainable energy community at small area granularity. And the pie chart on the right shows the breakdown of all BER ratings across that full SEC community. And by choosing different layers on that dashboard, the community can visualize or can generate visualizations on the most common heating fuels that are being used in that community and where particular heating fuels are the most common. Or additionally, what type of wall installations are most common in houses and where those houses are. And this is all hard quantitative data that can be used to develop evidence-based, data-driven plans that can improve how the community uses energy and where they might target improvements going forward. And finally, for this whistle-stop tour presentation on GIS, SEAI is also looking at community-level mapping of its grants. So this map on the left shows the distribution of SEAI's Warmer Home Scheme grants around the Dublin area, while the map on the right shows the distribution of Better Energy Home grants in the same area. So the grants on the left are 100% funded for individuals in receipt of certain welfare payments, while the Better Energy Home grants on the right require co-funding of the home energy upgrades from the homeowners. The GIS analysis shows that both grant schemes service certain communities in Dublin almost equally, the north, northeast and northwest suburbs of Dublin, as well as Swords. But each grant scheme can also uniquely service different parts of Dublin. For example, the 100% funded Warmer Home Scheme has greater grant uptake in the southwest suburbs and around Cabra, while the co-funded Better Energy Home grants have greater uptake in Dublin South, Southeast, as well as around Malahide and Portmarnock. And this shows that while different SEAI grants may have different uptake rates in different communities, the portfolio of SEAI grants, when taken as a whole, do provide wide community coverage, which is key to delivering a just transition as we move to a sustainable future. And further GIS analysis looking at these distributional effects will be a key focus for us in 2025. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Emily Byrne.
Thanks, Lee. I'll just pull up my slides. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emily Byrne. I'm an energy analyst here at SEAI, and today I'm going to speak about how we've been enhancing our energy statistics web pages in terms of what's currently available and what we plan to make available in the near future. So I'll take you through our 2024 publication portfolio timeline, and I'll also point you towards some key data and information which many of you may find useful. We've added new content this year, and plan to make even more available in 2025. So I'll show you what's new, what's still available, and what's coming soon. As you know, annually the Energy in Ireland report sits at the end of in mid-December, giving SEAI the opportunity to speak authoritatively to all that happened throughout the year, with several decades of long-term trends to add context. But the Energy in Ireland report is far from the only substantial output from the stats team. In May of this year, and every year, we published the interim national energy balance and a report on electricity and gas prices in Ireland, followed in July by a first look report on energy supply and the security of supply, a new output which satisfies a reporting obligation under the Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications Energy Security Package. In September, we published the full National Energy Balance, along with a new first look note on renewable energy and a mid-year review of Ireland's energy and energy-related emissions in 2024. This mid-year review note summarises the 36 annual web updates on electricity, gas and oil, or EGO, made by the stats team, as shown earlier by Cathal, to provide fast provisional insights on the monthly supplies of these energy products, but it doesn't detail sector level demand as Energy in Ireland does. The stats team also make about 50 updates per year to SEAI's mapping resources, ensuring that the Wind Atlas, BER map and Local Authority Climate Action Plan dashboard offer the best available data. And finally, the Energy in Ireland report that we've spoken about today stands on the shoulders of these other updates throughout the year. As well as these official data releases, reports and notes, this year we have a brand new addition to the website, which brings annual data on supply, transformation and demand into interactive panels to help users visualize the definitive annual data from the National Energy Balance. This data will be updated in line with the publication of the interim and full balances in May and September, and has been split into 4 key sections: energy supply, energy transformations, energy demand, and energy products. Energy supply, transformation, and demand sections are split down further into their relevant rows from the energy balance, be that a stream or a sector, and the energy product section is grouped into the aggregated energy product columns. So the user can then click through these sections to view graphical data from the energy balance. The data views are interactive and customizable. They have interactive tooltips which show detailed information when scrolled over with a cursor. We have the ability to zoom in to years of interest. Views allow for customized energy product selection, either by selecting from the drop-down menu or by directly selecting from the legend. The units can be changed between kilotons of oil equivalent, terajoules and terawatt hours. The tooltips will automatically update with the new unit selection, and the data can be downloaded using the download icon. Moving away from website data for a moment, we also had the addition of new statutory instruments in April and May of this year, which enhance SEAI's legal basis to collect energy data under the Energy Statistics Regulation and the Statistics on Natural Gas and Electricity Prices Regulation. In total, there were 3 new SIs conferred on SEAI, which work together to ensure that the Energy Statistics team has the power to satisfy its reporting requirements under the ESR and the EPR. Thankfully, in many cases, the stats team is fortunate to have strong engagement with most energy suppliers and actors in the Irish market. But where energy suppliers have been consistently resistant or slow to complete the relevant energy surveys, these SIs give SEAI the power to direct them to provide information. So back to the SEAI website, the Energy Statistics team has a blog section where you can select and read blogs written by members of the team. They're typically written when somebody on the team notices something that's noteworthy or of general interest to energy statistics and the wider community in Ireland. And we try to keep their language lighter than what you might find in our reports, so they can be a great introduction to topics for less technical readers too. We regularly publish new blog posts on a wide range of relevant topics, such as Ireland's energy prices, the conferral of new SIs, which I've just spoken about, an introduction to new reports and notes, and to use World Days like World GIS Day as an opportunity to introduce some of the technologies and techniques that we use on the team. So hopefully I've given you a good taster of some of the new energy stats content that you can find on our website. But don't worry though, our existing pages like the Energy Data Portal, the Enhanced Monthly Energy Data and the Conversion Factors are still available. But as I only have 10 minutes, I'll move on to show you what you can expect to become available in 2025. We also plan to add new content in the coming months, such as the interactive price panels developed by Teresa and shown by Mary, which were introduced in more detail earlier in the presentation. An example of what you'll be able to find on these price pages are the electricity 12-month averages of household weighted consumption band prices and their percentage of the market share. Electricity household price component, such as the base price, the non-recoverable taxes and levies, and the VAT by consumption band, and the electricity household consumption weighted band average price per semester, split out by price component. By toggling through the price component selections, you'll be able to see the average effect that each of these price components have on the household electricity prices, for example. And before I hand back over to Jim, last but certainly not least, we will soon upgrade our GIS software to the ArcGIS Enterprise environment, which will provide SEAI with the best GIS and mapping software available, allowing us to include higher levels of sophistication and customization in our spatial data, and produce maps such as the attic and installation maps, which will help drive the uptake of grants for roof and cavity wall installation, two measures which are relatively simple, effective, and the majority of costs can be covered by SEAI grants. The aim of these maps is to highlight areas of opportunity for contractors that provide these measures and to inform members of the public that might live in high opportunity areas that there are grants available. And finally, we've also developed the Sustainable Energy Communities Energy Master Planning, or the SEC EMP tool, which Lee has just taken us through. And so with that, I'd like to invite you all to download and read the Energy in Ireland 2024 report and to take a look at the other notes, reports, blogs, interactive data and other content available on the website via these links. I'll be happy to answer any questions on our energy statistics web pages, and I'll now hand you back to Jim.
Thanks very much, Emily, and to all of our presenters today. We had a very deep range of data presented across a range of Ps, and we now invite your questions. There's been some great questions coming in on the chat. We have about 25 minutes for questions and answers now with our expert panel. We've held back a couple to ask live for this session, and we've a few others there which I'll put to the panel now. Lee Carroll, Head of Stats at SEAI, let's start with you, and perhaps with the present and 2024. You presented some of the findings today on the latest monthly data, Cathal 2. Could you say a little bit more about what we're seeing in 2024 in terms of emissions and how you anticipate future rounds of data coming out for 2024?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jim. So Carl did a great job of talking us through some of the underlying data. What we can see and what we're reasonably confident in is that we're seeing electricity emissions in 2024 going down. So while they went down by 22% in 2023, we're anticipating, I think it's an 8.3% reduction in emissions in 2024. And the essential drivers of that reduction are mirror those that we saw in 2023. So increased use of net imported electricity and more renewables in the mix, and that has that result of reducing fossil generation in 2024. So down in electricity emissions. Then if we shift over to transport, the data that we have available for the first 9 months does seem to be indicating a reduction in emissions from the transport sector. Kind of from two factors, a slight reduction in demand potentially, but also increased biofuel blending, which is acting to displace some of the fossil diesel and fossil petrol on our roads. But there, the takeaway or the key point, I think Carl did a good job of calling this out, is it's not the fact that it's going down by 0.6% that's relevant. It's that electricity emissions for the last 3 years have been essentially constant. You know, changes are less than a percentage. So what we're seeing is a reduction in electricity, transport being about the same. And when we move into heat, we move into murkier waters because we're still feeling the effect of the Q4 heating season, and that can have a significant impact on the total result for 2024. And while we have good vision on gas deliveries and oil deliveries, in both of which are showing upticks in 2024, we don't have good vision of the highly carbon intensive solid fuels like coal or peat going into the economy. We don't have that good data on that just yet. So we really don't know whether heat's going to trend up or down. So in summary, it's a little bit long-winded. Electricity down, transport steady, and we're not entirely sure what's happening to heat yet, but early leading indicators for heat are that it's going up from certain fuel types.
Got that, Lee, and thanks very much for the extra detail there. Emma Lynch, head of modelling at SEAI, gave us a look forward then, and you talked, Emma, about some of the risks associated with the various targets on demand and on renewables. Could you just recap what you're currently seeing as the key risks in terms of the technologies that we really need to double down on in terms of delivery?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Jim. Yeah, so that's I suppose it's from looking at the kind of the previous projections, and when we set the input assumptions for the modeling and set up those WEM and WAM scenarios, kind of look at the difference and kind of the progress that's been made. We expect each year that a subset of the WAM scenario, sort of the assumptions that are in the WAM scenario, would move into the, you know, from planned to implemented each year. And so it's really where, when we go to kind of set those scenarios up each year, we look at, you know, how far has that implementation gone? And it's something that needs to be continuously reviewed. So, you know, when we see, I suppose we looked at risks across all sectors. We selected a few key risks that are in our projections report and the ones that I went through today. But that's kind of our own selection of risks as well, in consultation with the stakeholders and government departments. There's plenty more risks out there, but I guess some of the key ones that that we looked at, you know, in terms of offshore wind, some of the kind of I suppose this goes for other areas as well, but restrictions in planning and things like that, which might mean that that pipeline is delayed, so we don't see as much installed capacity build up as quickly, and what we need to see to hit those levels. You know, we also looked at the potential delays in transport, both in sort of the demand reduction measures, and also in, you know, the deployment of things like EVs, heat pumps, retrofits. So it's really kind of across a broad range of sectors, but yeah, I suppose those are some of the kind of key risks that we looked at, and something that we will evaluate kind of continuously each year when we go to produce the projections. Again, we're in the middle of projections, the next projection cycle now, so we're looking at you know, what progress have we seen between last time we set up the projections and now, and what does that mean for the WAM scenario? You know, if that gap is growing between what's been planned and what's actually been implemented, then we need to revise those assumptions.
Great, thanks, Emma. And so there's a report online for those who'd like to delve deeper into the latest round of national energy projections, and as Emma says, being updated at the moment. While I have you, Emma, there was a specific question on data centers for a brief answer. Has a scenario been modeled where the number of data centers is lower than projected? Or I guess, do you do any scenarios around that? And what sort of impact do you anticipate that might have?
Yeah, so for this set of projections, we didn't specifically model a scenario in which there was lower data center demand. We used the air-grid median scenario for our projection of demand in these projections. But we did look at kind of, I suppose, decomposing the, for example, the energy efficiency directive and the final energy consumption progress against that into its component parts. So in the projections report, we do kind of pull out the impact, you know, between now and 2030 in terms of data centers expected contribution to that and in added demand, and kind of that, as I talked about, the opposing forces with you know, making those energy efficiency gains versus added demand. There's also, I suppose, we do look at you know, various different sensitivities each year when we produce the projections. So, you know, as new policies, as we kind of review new policies or kind of potential there, we do you know, produce additional scenarios as well. But in terms of the overall projections, we don't just assume that a target will be met. For instance, we kind of look at the component pieces in the current implemented policy and the policy that's planned and maybe not implemented yet, to kind of break down those sort of component parts and the impact they could potentially have.
That's great, Emma. Thanks very much for those clarifications. We'll move to a few more of the questions that came in online. Some of them are specific, but on key topics. The first one is around interconnection, which we've seen really coming to the fore in the last couple of years, and being something that's playing a bigger role in terms of our electricity mix, is interconnected and imported units of energy across the interconnectors. I might throw to you, Cathal, just to recap on the accounting there. There were some questions about how is the electricity across the border with Northern Ireland dealt with? Are the net import figures showing the import into Republic of Ireland only, or into the island, and those kind of things? Maybe you could just run us through those as a reminder. Thank you.
So I suppose first to clarify that we are presenting these as national energy statistics for Ireland. I know there's probably people here who work in the area of electricity generation in Ireland and might be involved in the integrated single electricity market, which covers north and south. So there, electricity can be traded between north and the south. But in terms of national energy statistics, physical flows of electricity across the interconnector between the north and the south, or if it flows into the south, it's treated as an import. Likewise, if it flows across the interconnector to Great Britain, it's an export, and vice versa. So I think there was something there about the Moyle interconnector that effectively imports into Northern Ireland. We wouldn't capture that. Basically, imports into Northern Ireland from Great Britain wouldn't be considered an import into Ireland.
The Republic. Yeah, got it. That's very clear. Thanks, Cathal. And Lee, maybe a supplementary for you on that. Given we are importing more electricity across the interconnector, do we have a sense of how renewable or otherwise those units of electricity are versus what we might be generating here at home?
Yeah, it's a fair question, because as you point out, Jim, it's becoming net imported electricity is becoming a bigger and bigger slice. So I think we're 9.5% in 2023. I think we're trending towards an average of about 14% in 2024. And I think in June of 2024, it jumped up to 20%. So it is important to understand where that electricity is coming from. The answer, I guess, from the Energy in Ireland perspective is that the transfer of electricity across an interconnector wipes out all of its renewable share. So when it comes in, when it's imported, it comes into on the books as non-renewable. But the reality is that the interconnectors do provide a lot of support for the trading of electricity generated by renewables, and good interconnection infrastructure and good interconnection policy supports the the rollout of additional renewable electricity generation, because Ireland would then have the opportunity to import excess renewable generation from the UK, or in the future France, when wind is not blowing in Ireland, or the sun is not shining, and the vice versa of that will be true as well. So yeah, so kind of there's a difference between how things are handled statistically, but good interconnection really does help bolster and bake in good renewable electricity infrastructure.
Thanks very much, Lee, and it's great to see those kind of longer term major grid infrastructure projects really starting to have an impact. And I know that's what Ireland does in that regard is part of a broader scheme of European-wide expansion of interconnection right across Europe, so we can make the most of those weather systems as they move across the continent. Another specific question was around biofuel blending in transport. It's clearly making a big impact, particularly biodiesel. Maybe Cathal, you might start on this one. What's in the way of us just blending a lot more biofuel into petrol and diesel? So you might remind us of the sort of percentage levels we're at now in terms of the blends, but why don't we just use 100% biofuels in transport, for example?
Yeah, so I think, so first of all, if we look at petrol, gasoline, so by the standard of the fuel that we use in Ireland, it is limited to 10% ethanol, bioethanol by volume. So that would be less than 10% by energy. So there's a technical limit there. So in other words, if a supplier was to go beyond that, they couldn't sell it as standard petrol for use in a road car. And then that would open all sorts of issues with manufacturers, not standing over vehicles using that fuel and things like that. Then, likewise, on the biodiesel side, conventional biodiesel, which was all that was really used in as a blended fuel in diesel until last couple of years, is limited to 7% by volume. So that's FAME, fatty acid methyl ester. And then there is HVO, which people are probably aware of, which technically can be blended much higher ratio, to be used as 100%. HVO as a replacement for fossil diesel. I guess the limiting thing here is the availability of it, the availability of sustainable feedstocks. That biofuel has to come from somewhere. A lot of biodiesels, both conventional and non-conventional, so conventional and HVO that are supplied into Ireland, come from either used cooking oil or tallow or other wastes coming out of the food processing industry. So those feedstocks are limited. I think that I'll leave it there. We can get into things about crops and things like, but I think people are probably aware of that already. But that's effectively it. It's a limiting factor of feedstocks and availability.
Thanks, Cathal. That's clear, and clearly playing an important transitional role as we shift to a fleet of electric vehicles. You might imagine a future where there are no more petrol or diesel cars. The enthusiasts will kill me for saying that, but where all cars are electric, air quality is better, and we're getting out of cars as much as possible as well. So a key part of that demand reduction storyline that's coming out and is much needed is to give people opportunities to take public transport more often, to cycle and walk where that's possible. And we've seen a great shift in investment in those facilities versus just building new roads over the last few years, which has been really
and there will always be there will always be somewhere to use sustainable feedstocks. There's an aviation sector that hasn't started to use biofuels yet in any serious way. So there will be plenty of uses for that. So there's a lot of competing uses, I guess, and that we can't expect to blend our way out of it. Yeah.
Thanks again. And Mary Holland, senior analyst on the statistics team, can I ask a question for you? You gave us a run through of prices, and we could see the impact of demand reductions during COVID, and the impact that had on prices on Ukraine. So there's some interesting storylines coming out of there. How do we collect data on prices? When will the data for 2024 be available? And do you have a view on how price has been tracking most recently?
Yeah, well, thanks, Jim. So with our electricity and gas prices, we begin collecting them for the second half of 2024. In January, we survey the electricity and gas suppliers, and we have a deadline under the EU regulation at the end of March to submit those to Eurostat. So in early April, we will be able to publish the data, and I guess when we collect the data for a full year, not only do we collect the semester prices, but we get a breakdown of all the components over the year, the taxes, the energy network costs, energy supply network costs. And I guess as we saw, from the graphs earlier, we have seen prices beginning to come down. So I guess we won't know for sure until we get all of the data in, but hopefully there'll be we'll continue to see those decreases.
Thanks very much, Mary. And Lee, you'd like to follow up?
Yeah, just so Mary did a great job of presenting today, and she hit the point that large energy consumers, they're close to wholesale prices, so they don't have the same hedging kind of factors that we do. So their price went up very quickly, and it's coming down more quickly now, and that should give homeowners a little bit of hope, because the downward trajectory we're seeing developing reasonably strongly in a high consumption business is likely to kind of arrive in the residential sector prices soon, within within 12 to 18 months. So there's light at the end of the tunnel there.
That's great. Thanks, Lee. And while I have you, I think I'll ask you a further question. We've noticed a positive trend in terms of reduced residential energy demand in 2022 and 2023. And you mentioned some of the drivers. Could you just recap those for us? And do we have a sense of how much is coming from each driver, or how might we get under the hood of understanding what's actually causing those reductions?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a difficult one to answer, because there is no one average house in Ireland. We have a whole range of different of houses, and it's populated by a big range of the population. So some people who are well off maybe don't really feel the increases in energy prices. Other people who are less well off really feel it very intensely, and maybe reducing their energy consumption to kind of keep track or to keep pace with the additional costs. Similarly, if you're in a well insulated home, a little bit goes a long way. Whereas if you're in a home that has poor insulation, you're kind of driven to having higher energy demand regardless of price or weather. But I do think probably the big two is weather and wallet. We have seen that the last 2 or 3 winters have been warmer than average in Ireland, by nearly double-digit percentages in 2022 and 2023. And as Mary has highlighted, very significant energy prices increases for the residential sector. So price elasticity and weather effects are likely to be key drivers, but it'd be irresponsible not to acknowledge that there are many other things happening. I mean, there's a considerable rollout of home energy upgrades around the country. The building stock is increasing, also with new builds coming online. There's other social dynamics in there. We had a lot of work from home in post-COVID, but that's increasingly shifting to a return to office policy. And again, Ireland's population is increasing as well. So really a lot of moving parts, and very, very difficult right now to say it's 30% of this and 50% of that. We'd need deeper analysis, maybe with some support from colleagues in the university and academic sectors to bring their expertise and bandwidth to the problem. But we'd really welcome that.
That's great. Thanks, Lee. Thanks to everyone for the questions. They're still rolling in here online. There's one there about fines, and obviously a lot of what you heard today was about how we've made great progress, but that we can't necessarily equate that with success, and we need to redouble efforts if we're going to get near our targets and the fines associated with those. We clearly have to purchase annual emissions allowances in order to comply with emissions targets, as well as statistical transfers for renewable energy targets. Excuse me. They could come at significant cost to Ireland. Could you say a little bit about what's out there in terms of current estimates and scale of those, and what do you see there, Lee?
Yeah, so there's still significant uncertainty. So there's, I think just last week, a new figure circulated in the media of a cost of about 20 billion euros. And I know that maybe 6 or 12 months ago, another value of 8 billion euros was released from Depender. So while there's uncertainty in what the total number will be, it will be big. It will be on the order of, you know, billions or tens of billions. And as you alluded to earlier, Jim, like it makes far more sense for us to kind of take that money, invest it now in infrastructure, get the benefit of trying to bring people out of energy poverty, to increase our air quality, to enhance our energy security, rather than to have that money going to a kind of a simple compliance cost. So really, instead of it being something daunting for me, it's a call to action. We really need to invest, you know, Irish money in Ireland now to get the quality of the infrastructure up and to bring everybody along on a just transition to a sustainable future.
That's great, Lee. A great way to sum up the challenge that we all have to find a way to live within legally binding carbon budgets, planetary boundaries, but also, I guess, a great role for government to provide those who can least afford to make the transition with continued support. We see record levels of funding in the last number of years, so we certainly hope that that continues. Lastly, I'd just like to throw it to Mary Holland to give us a reminder of where people can delve into the data should they like to see some more detail. I know, thanks to Emily, we got a tour of the web pages, but Mary, just want to add a little bit to that?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So yeah, if you go to the SEAI website and across the top, there's energy, data and insights. And there you have Ireland's energy statistics, and you also have the national the modelling publications. If you click into energy statistics, down the bottom, you can have monthly data and annual data, which shows our new panels that we've developed over the past year. And price data is also there under key statistics, and we are also moving to new price panels that will be coming very soon. Our maps are also on the website, and we will provide links to all of those when we, in response to the Q&A. So thank you.
Thanks, Mary. That's perfect. And do look out. We will cover some of those questions that we haven't managed to cover and some of the headlines in a Q&A afterwards, which we'll put up online. Thanks, everyone, for the presentations, and thanks for joining to everyone in the audience. Please stay engaged with us. If you have any questions for us, get in touch directly with us at SEAI, and we'll do our best to answer those. Thanks again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks a lot.